Hi. Thank you all for coming. Genuinely a huge turnout, and that's an honour. This is the first one. I'm nervous. I'm scared. I've dressed as ideally all three political parties that I support. And during today's kind of conversation, it's a real honour for me. As some of you know, sort of 13 months ago, I had a very bizarre phone call from number 10 Downing Street asking me to work for them, which was not as a fairly prominent and angry activist against the government as an anarchist during my teenage years, and a general sort of disruptive, communist, Marxist bastard, much to the annoyance of my parents, was not a phone call I really had ever planned on having in my life. And so, making sure that I could get the picture for my parents, I duly put on the only suit I owned at the time and went along. And I was very sceptical. I was sceptical of government, I was sceptical of policy, I was sceptical of how anything from above could potentially affect anything human. And it was really the gentleman that we're going to be in conversation with today who very quickly, within about 35 seconds of me meeting him, made me kind of realise that, you know what? It's not the world that's portrayed. Politics isn't the thing that you kind of look at. There are these kind of wonderful, talented, brilliant, intelligent people who, more amazingly than almost any other sort of space, you can disagree with without it being a personal insult. You can have a conversation with about views that are very different. And that was fascinating. And without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Rohan Silva, Senior Policy Advisor to number 10 Downing Street, and my boss. Hi.
Hello.
We have to do this kind of thing where we pretend we haven't met backstage and then go through that sort of rigmarole. Yeah. So, in the great sort of pretense of this entire conversation for other people's benefit.
Right.
A, thank you for giving me a job. That was nice. Hey, very good of you.
I'm just sorry that it was so traumatic. You shaved off your beard. I mean, that's frightening.
You know, I feel a little bit like Terry Waite without the radiator. You know, it's that sort of feeling. And you know, there are odd feelings, and I wonder how you kind of feel about those. And I think we'll get to that a bit later on. But kind of, you know, you're a young man, you're wearing a sparkly... How did you end up in government? Where did you kind of come from? How did you enter into what, in my head previously, was a very much a sort of public school boy background, Eton, you know, Oxbridge, and they're all up there with their sort of Bullingdon Club mentality, and yet here you are sort of speaking some sense. So talk to me a little bit about how you kind of arrived here.
Yeah, well, I had... my first sort of proper job was in the Treasury. I got into this thing called the fast stream, which supposedly fast-tracks you up the civil service. And it was the only thing I ever really wanted to do this. I had this sort of, you know, weird idea that policy was the kind of change I wanted to make in the world. And I started at the Treasury, my dream job, and this was when I was 23, so back in sort of 2004. And on my first day, I realised that I fucking hated it. And it was so depressing, you know, to have like dreamed for a few years of this is the thing you really want to do. The only thing is like mates around you are totally sure they want to be bankers and lawyers.
What was it that kind of made you snap?
So on my first day at the Treasury, I mean, I should have known that going to work for a massive bureaucracy would turn out to be pretty bureaucratic, right? Who'd have thunk it? It's that kind of strategic insight that I think I bring to policy. So on my first day, I was in this bit of the Treasury called tax strategy and coordination, right? So
that's pretty sexy.
Sexy bit of the Treasury. And they were trying to get the Treasury to work more closely with Revenue and Customs, right? And to try and do that...
It might be worth clarifying that seems obvious to the rest of us, but it's not obvious in Whitehall.
It's not obvious in Whitehall. This was, you know, radical thinking. And they were spending all this money on away days and kind of get-togethers and all this. And I said, well, hang on, this was on my very first day, hang on, we don't have any of the phone numbers or email addresses of people in Revenue and Customs on our intranet. And from what I can tell, they don't have ours. So it's really hard to work together. So for all this kind of crap of, beers and kayaking together, we can't actually... So look, I'll tell you what, I'll just go and try and get that sorted. And my team leader put his arm around me and took me for a little walk. He said, look, you'll go far, it's going to be great, but you know what? Don't stick your nose into things that aren't your job. And I said, well, who's gonna do that then? And he goes, I don't know. And I left a year and a half later, and that was still not sorted. And one of the great kind of revenges of GDS, Government Digital Service, and so on, was kind of fixing some of those annoying. But that feeling of you're in a box and you have your job to do, and that's it. I fucking hate. And actually, a lot of the things I tried to do in policy about kind of crowdsourcing and opening up policy through open data and so on is about saying, actually, no one person has a monopoly on good ideas. You don't know where they're going to pop up from. And I just thought on that first day, I might have been wrong, but I thought as a new kid, I had an idea. I wanted to have a crack at fixing it. And I was told very firmly, no way.
I mean, we kind of forget now, but, the political landscape at that time, I mean, whilst Brown was doing almost everything that it seemed possible to kind of undo sort of Blair's sort of good work in inverted commas, it was still very unobvious that the Conservatives had an opportunity at getting in.
Yeah.
I mean, so how, you must have been taking some sort of a gamble there.
Oh, it was a massive pun. It's weird. My mum, for some reason, only sees 3 careers as legitimate, right? Doctor, lawyer, newsreader. Right, and this is honestly true.
You'd be a good George Alagaya, actually.
Thank you,
sort of stunt man.
Yeah, and I remember calling her and telling her I was quitting the Treasury, giving up the pension and the nice canteen to go and work for George and David. And she goes, "Oh, that's amazing! You're going to be reading the news soon." I was like, "That's not how it works." But so she was happy for some reason with that, and I went to the LSE after Manchester, and when I was there, I was really a sort of utopian kind of leftist. I really believed that it was possible to have all the answers on a kind of sheet of paper, and if a government wasn't trying to fix everything using those kind of rules, it was a sign of that they were kind of morally kind of evil. They were kind of representative, and that might be right. I'm not saying that I'm right or wrong, but what I came to believe when I was at, or in my view see when I was at the LSE, studying people like Karl Popper, was that actually the far smarter, more popular, but powerful people than me had also thought the same, and it had always and everywhere led to disaster, because it's not possible, however smart that cabal of people is at the centre, it's not possible to have all the answers. Life, society, economies are just much more beautifully complex than that, which is why you should try and decentralise power, why you should open up data, open up decision making. And so actually, when I was at the LSE, something broke, and I started sort of thinking, fuck, actually maybe I'm sort of more of the centre right than centre left. But at the time, Michael Howard was leader of the Tory Party. It wasn't, I that whole sort of anti-immigration, just sort of it felt to me very mean-spirited. And so the reason that when David Cameron took over, I was kind of excited about it was finally it felt like someone who was modern and forward-thinking, and this sort of philosophy that I've been drawn to could potentially sync up with a kind of politics and a politician that, didn't suck. And so I used to try out all my kind of zany policy schemes with local councils. So spending transparency, I did with some local councils, tested that out, because the civil servants were saying to us, who were in government, who were looking at our policy agenda and what it would take to implement it, were saying to us, that'll cost you. They're like sort of, they're like cowboy builders. It's like, that'll cost you.
So you were almost as I guess we would probably say in this world, you were kind of beta testing policy out on a sort of local level. And that's, as far as from what I've been reading, I mean, that's how you and Liam Maxwell became acquainted.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So there's this guy called Liam Maxwell, who's now the Chief Technology Officer at the government, and in my view, the badass of the world.
I second that view. The man is a fucking badass.
He's amazing. This is the guy who takes, am I allowed to say this? He used to take to meetings, maybe he doesn't anymore, he used to take to meetings with kind of idiotic departments That's my words, not Liam's. Briefcase with £1 million in kind of fake pound notes, like £10 notes, £20 notes. And when this department was proposing some like cockamamie £800 million IT scheme or £5 billion IT scheme, he'd get one of these suitcases out and go, "What? You're talking about 800 of these, are you? Come on, justify that." This guy is amazing. He is this like ideal of. But he was a local councillor at Windsor Council, and I used to go to him with all my harebrained schemes.
What is it about innovation and sort of entrepreneurship in the UK that has produced, Arm, Autonomy, some very, very strong and powerful companies? What is it about the sort of British mentality that isn't really celebrating that? And what is it about government on whatever sort of dualism that doesn't really sort of focus on that?
Well, I think it's a lot about risk. I think it's a lot about risk, and I think there's quite a bit about class as well. Right. I remember when we were in opposition, I created this thing for George called the New Enterprise Council, which had a bunch of founders on it to advise us on policy. And when we launched it, the FT did this comparison between our Enterprise Council and Gordon Brown's Business Council, literally tallying up who had more sirs and lords and dames and ladies, and concluding, as you would do, because ours was about startups and theirs was about FTSE 100 chairman, that we lose. And I think that kind of mindset is still incredibly strong, sadly, and that's going to take time to punch through. So I think that has a big part of it. The other thing, this is sort of, it doesn't quite explain the previous governments, left and right, slightly ignoring Cambridge, is there is this sort of slight paradox, which is politicians do by and large care about startups, but the point about startups is they're dispersed everywhere. How do you go and find them? Yep. They don't have lobbying people, they don't have public affairs people, they're not in and out of Whitehall the whole time. So where are they? They're not kind of in your life. And the cool thing about Tech City,
you would say it's a visibility issue about small businesses to government, and due to, I guess, the nature of government taking it has to take a long-term view, and up to the next election and beyond sort of opinion. You would say that it's far more that. Is it a lack of political engagement from small medium enterprises? I mean,
I think small businesses are generally massively failed by the representative groups that are supposed to stand for them. I think they do a totally. If there was ever something that needs to be disrupted and kind of done well, and if there was ever someone who could do that, by the way, mate, it's you and this kind of movement. But there should be a trade union for entrepreneurs, and there isn't. And the voice of entrepreneurs, as a result, is much smaller than it should be. And I remember the first economic speech that the Prime Minister did was in, I think, June 2010. It was a CBI speech, and I wrote the last kind of third of it, which was all about disruptive innovation and startups. And I was putting in all these stats, which are true, like 6% of high growth firms generate 60% of jobs. The Kaufman Foundation in the work in the States, 95% of net new jobs comes from companies less than 5 years old. All of that stuff I was arguing should skew government policy to early stage companies. And Whitehall kept taking that out, kept taking those stats out, even though they're true.
But why do you think, why is that?
It didn't feel right to them, because, they don't, these civil servants just would never, ever encounter startups. I remember there was some heinous bit of European regulation that was, in my view, going to really clobber the tech scene. And I said to the officials responsible, have you actually talked to any companies about this? And they said, yes, very proudly, yes, we have. I said, well, who have you talked to?
This wasn't the IP data logging thing, was it?
It was the right to be forgotten, the new data act.
700 fucking pages I read on that document. I mean, honestly, seriously, Kieran was like, you don't need to read these things, but I did read it because I cared. This was a policy and enacted effectively what felt like a 60-year-old, and I'm going to use, actually, I'll just say European to avoid any sort of xenophobia. It felt like a 60-year-old gentleman, and that's not trying to be ageist, but someone who maybe doesn't understand the world as clearly as we do, had kind of Googled something and then kind of obviously found a result of something that must have either been embarrassing or inopportune, and had decided in his kind of infinite wisdom, and I'm saying it he, and that's not trying to play gender here, but it was quite a male thing, by which I mean I think he Googled some porn and it showed up again. And he wanted this right to be forgotten, right? This idea that if you have an account somewhere, if you hit delete, it should be deleted everywhere. Not deleted in the application, but deleted in all heritage moments, all backups, all cloud, all similar, right? Now, on the sort of first instance of that seems very simple. If your company is 2 years old, you delete something and a database goes away. If you've been online for 15 years, you are going to have a backup system that runs across DAT, Laserdisc, VHS, mini disc, cloud. The idea of trying to delete this stuff was insane.
Right.
And it was this kind of European sort of mentality towards just technology really blew my it changed my view of Europe quite considerably.
Absolutely bonkers. And when I said to the civil servants, all right, so who have you talked to about this? They said, oh, we've consulted. We talked to Tesco and Microsoft. Brilliant. And this was literally, they were so pleased at this. They were sort of, we've really, really worked hard at this. But by and large, stuff in life is more cock-up than conspiracy. And the truth is that no startup company has a public affairs arm. And the cool thing, I think, about Tech City over time as an initiative is it meant for the first time, I think, in the history of British policy that the way that policy is generally captured by big business, Tech City meant, and I think continues to mean, that government policy right now is really captured by small, high-growth tech companies. And if you look at the policies that have been introduced over the past few years, there's not many things, I think, that the community has been calling for that haven't been introduced. So, entrepreneur relief, the incredible tax breaks for angel investment. We then got told that the big issue was IPOs. So we said you can list with 10% of your shares, not 25%, reduced reporting, governance requirements, the entrepreneur visa. Reshma Sohoni from Seed Camp suggested that to me a couple of weeks before we were launching Tech City. I was able to get that announced in the speech, launching Tech City. And that feedback loop, which normally just used to be between, frankly, Tesco and government, is now something that really, truly is between kind of Tech City and government. Now, is that perfect? No, because there are small businesses right across the UK that also deserve to have their voice heard, and we've got to find ways of allowing that to happen. But this is so much better than it kind of, it otherwise would have been. Tech City is a Trojan horse for just really cool policy.
Obviously, government's kind of really opened up the data side. It's trying to be more and more transparent. And yet, on the other side, there's this restriction against pornography that's seemingly led by, save the children, think of the children. And yet, actually, it looks like that could potentially be quite a draconian, sort of Orwellian measure. And now Orwell wasn't sharp enough to identify that actually, on one side, the government would simultaneously become quite internet aware and savvy and actually very transparent.
Yeah.
But on the other side, that would somehow increase
Yeah.
this sort of restriction. What's your sort of view on this, and at what point does government get the right to kind of dictate what either our online or /offline life is?
I think what's happening in the UK on tech is, I think in many ways, we're sort of ahead of other countries in the world. So you're starting to see a lot of high street chains going into administration because e-commerce penetration in the UK is that much higher than elsewhere.
Much higher than compared to the States, for example.
Much, I think 2-3 times higher. And my sort of take on child porn is that you've got a chancellor who's a proper, he had a ZX80 and a ZX81. He used to cycle to work in opposition wearing a Mozilla Firefox t-shirt. He's that much of a kind of geek.
That's pretty geeky.
I'd say that's pretty geeky. And a prime minister who really kind of gets tech. And so I just think they're grappling with issues sooner than other countries. And at this point, I'm not a parent, at least as far as I know, and I don't know what it would feel like, and maybe some of you can talk about this in questions or comments, but a child aged 13, a young person aged 13 with a smartphone in their pocket that has access to all the porn in the world, right? It's not like an accidental find of some dog-eared, rain sort of torn porn.
Are you not talking about
in a
our
bush.
personal experiences as 30-year-old men where we'd find porn in the bush?
Find porn in the bush. We used to call them the porn fairies that delivered that. And
that was a weird thing. Do you think that still exists?
I don't know. But
so mental. It was always crinkly. Do you remember?
Many seasons of
through rain.
Right.
Sick people.
Classical liberals in the 19th century, who were libertarians in a kind of an American sense, drew a very firm distinction between how government policy should affect young people and adults.
Yeah.
And paternalism is okay for young people. That's sort of, it's okay to be a parent to young people. And I think saying, actually, we do need to pay attention to young people being able to access pornography.
But we are deeply in danger of effectively creating, the new Chinese firewall without being, too extreme. The point is if we as liberal, sort of strong-minded humans, and actually a country that has, we are historically frigid, but actually quite kinky. In behind closed doors, and actually eroticism within the UK is very, very popular. There are lots of sort of transgressions, right?
Yeah.
There always have been.
Yeah.
Are we not in danger of sort of opening up these kind of these scenarios where government gets to control our thoughts?
Put up on the. The way I've approached it, I'm someone that's passionate and passionate about technology and entrepreneurship, but I'm not a techie. Right? I'm not a coder. My approach on this stuff when I was in government was just to make sure that the policy people were being connected to the world-class tech experts. So Jimmy Wales came in time and again, for example, one example out of many, to just feed in his views about the challenges of implementation, but also productive ways of how to go about this. Because, you might reasonably say, look, that objective of trying to protect young people from pornography, or trying to make sure that child pornography isn't available, we buy that aim. However, the devil is in how you get there. And there I would say, if any of you in the audience, if any of you know people that have a view about how to make this happen, and remember this, the government will happily, if there's a commercial way of dealing with this, i.e. if there's a kind of bottom-up startup that has come up with a way of grappling with these issues and fixing it, the government will just back that to the nines. I mean, there's a great commercial opportunity there. And by the way, you can be damn sure that the Americans, the Germans, the French, the Australians will all be talking about this issue in a year or two's time.
Of course.
So I think actually what we are in the UK is just ahead of that debate. And there's a commercial opportunity, as well as you rightly say, a risk in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of expression if it's implemented badly.
It's time to open up the floor to questions. So if you do have a question.
I wanted to ask you what your hope was for the future of Tech City.
It's all gone much better than we could ever have hoped for in terms of the global companies that are investing here, in terms of the number of new businesses that are being created. Mike Lynch, who founded Autonomy, was one of the people I spent a lot of time with before we did this Tech City thing, this government initiative. And he said something to me which I still think is the best vision of what Tech City should be. He said, the problem that the UK has always had is that if you want to start a company, particularly a tech company, where do you go? And, until Tech City, until this really blew up, actually, if you're a graduate of Manchester or York or Bristol or Oxford or wherever, where do you go to be around like-minded tech people starting companies? Now you come here. And, the reason that the first thing I tried to do with Tech City was get Google or someone to build a civic space was to have a place that you could just walk in that's kind of free of charge. You're not being sold to. You can just hang out and be around people who are trying to do the same sort of thing as you. I just think things like that are so important, and the role that civic space plays in driving growth is incredibly important. So I think where I'd love to be is to have achieved the Mike Lynch goal, which is, just as in America, if you're starting a tech company, you know axiomatically the thing that's just the default assumption is you go to the Valley. I know New York's great and maybe you go there now, but for the last 20 years, you just go to the Valley. Hopefully we're getting that kind of critical density here. I'd love to get that. And then secondly, on the civic space, I still think we need more civic spaces. And the reason that I really fought to get funding to regenerate the roundabout and create a new space there that would be space for classrooms, 3D printing labs, startup space, things that individual startups can't afford, is to have that front door to Tech City, that no matter who you are and where you're from and what time it is and what you know and who you know, you can walk in there and be around kindred spirits and be sucked into this amazing world. That's so important. And I think if we can do that, then this is just then has a life of its own. This then is, we're set for life, because you have that flywheel of the brightest and best from across the country coming here and building things and doing things you could never imagine. And that's what Silicon Valley has. And while Tech City is very different and always going to be, that would be an amazing thing.
Interesting. Any more questions?
I'm interested in hearing a bit more about your opinion about big business, because I completely take your point that it's really, fundamentally important to support startups. But you mentioned Google in Tech City, which you called it a civic space, which is, I guess, arguable. It's a certain type of civic space, let's call it that.
Yeah.
And also you entered something that you could call big business, really heavy institution, and you were able to bring in some sort of disruptive power, which is, that's your success, right? So what's your opinion on innovative power of big business, and what do you think is the relation to startup companies?
Yeah. It's a great question, and again, I think one of the things that we got sort of, there were eyebrows raised back in November 2010 when we launched the Tech City thing, was that I really felt that an ecosystem should have large companies and small companies and research institutions, and at the time, and civic space, and at the time Tech City had lots of small and medium-sized companies, but not much of the other things. And so I really believe that big companies can support the growth of startups. In Google's case, by funding a building, a 5-6-story building that has, I think, still just one Google employee in a 6-story building, and each floor given over to a different startup incubator. I think that's really amazing. I think that big companies can also play a big role in terms of buying from small companies, in terms of corporate venture capital, in terms of providing training opportunities. When I'm trying to think of the companies that were our kind of launch partners, but I think Qualcomm were giving IP advice to startups. All that stuff I think is really important. My beef with big business actually is not the way they can help startups in the way that this one is helping this startup now, but is rather that they captured and dominated government policy making and skewed it in a direction that was not helpful to entrepreneurs. And secondly, that they had dominated government spending and contracts. And I just think that's heinous. I think that's genuinely immoral that a small group of companies capture all of the taxpayers' money being spent, because it means that innovative companies can't grow, and often slow-moving sclerotic companies are subsidised and propped up by government. So that's my real beef, is the way they interact with government. The relationship, the cozy relationship between big government and big business. That's what I have a beef with, rather than the role of big companies in the economy more broadly, which I think is like any company, can be good or bad. And I think in Tech City, it's been fantastic, the impact that these larger companies have had here in terms of helping people raise their sites and fund things that otherwise couldn't be funded.
I think that kind of, there's a point that we kind of, I think, hope to try and get through in the conversation, but I think we ultimately failed, which is whether rightly, wrongly, whatever your beliefs are, the political system is kind of actually comprised of all of you. And it's not, just Rohan making policy decisions. It's not just someone like I trying to champion these decisions or trying to help that piece through. It really is a place where we all have to participate. And I think in the UK we've become particularly disenfranchised with the political system. We've become disenfranchised with the political class. And actually, what was bizarre, kind of concerning, worrying, fascinating, exciting, was there are many people, and many more people than you ever dare hear about in press, who are trying to reform this political system, who are trying to create a better democracy for us all, in a variety of different ways, of course, but actually we should never lose hope about a democratic system. We should never lose this idea that we count, and we should certainly never ever stop voicing our opinions. But I think it's very, very important that we vote and that we use our rights as democratic citizens to help government. And one of the great pleasures was to be a part of a very open door philosophy.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
10.
If this didn't come across in what I was saying, I'm sorry, but literally everything that I'm, proud of having been able to play a part in getting done in government, every single thing came from someone, else saying to me, you should fucking do that, or not do that, or keep me. And, Tech City was that with Matt Webb, Entrepreneur Visas was that with Reshma Zahoni, Entrepreneur, all of these things, a long list of policies. Now, I've been lucky to do a lot of stuff on children in care. I created the UK's Life Science. All of those things came from people saying, have you ever thought about doing this? And there are 3 people in particular in number 10 now. A guy called Tim Luke, who came in from, he ran tech research for Barclays Capital, a guy called Daniel Korski, and a guy called Christopher Lockwood. All 3 of them are the most kind of technophilic, or technophile, pro-enterprise, pro-disruptive innovation you could ever kind of hope for. They really are kind of cool, great people. And so there's a proper open door. If there's something that is, getting on your tits, if there's something that you think government should be doing or not doing, get it in there. We'll help, post it to the right person. It really is a cool moment. And there's going to be an election in a couple of years. Who knows what's going to happen? This might well be our little window. We might look back on this time and say, what are our regrets? What did we not get done? I think if hopefully that came across tonight, and it's one of you could be looking back in a year or two's time saying, you know what, that change to tax policy or that investment in that bit of infrastructure in East London came about because of an email I sent. That really, really can happen. There are dozens of people for whom that is true, and it could happen. It could happen to you.
I hope you'll join me in thanking Rohan for, I think, what I hope was an illustrative and interesting talk. Thank you so much. Right, see, tell the lovely people what they've got next.
That was bloody great. Thank you to Mr. Rohan Silva for being our very first guest at Chew the Fat. Everyone, another round of applause from Rohan Silva.